Benji Crawford pushed open the door to room 237, expecting to say his final goodbye to his dying mother. What he saw instead stopped him dead in his tracks. Sitting beside his mother's bed was Catalina, his ex-wife who had vanished from his life 4 years ago. But that wasn't what made his blood freeze. 3 little girls stood quietly near the window. 5 years old, beautiful, and absolutely, unmistakably, his. Have you ever walked into a room and your entire world changed in an instant? Where everything you thought you knew about your life crumbled in a single heartbeat? For 5 years, Benji had been visiting the graves of children he believed were stillborn. 5 years of crushing guilt, wondering if his failures as a husband had somehow caused their deaths. 5 years of therapy, trying to rebuild a life destroyed by loss. But what Benji saw next would shatter everything he thought he knew about his life. The oldest girl, tall, alert, with his mother's intelligent eyes, stepped protectively in front of her sisters when she saw him. They knew to be afraid. They had been taught to fear him. But how could 3 children, his children, have been hidden for 5 years? How does a mother fake the death of triplets and disappear without a trace? By the end of this story, you'll understand how a dying grandmother's final wish exposed the most devastating family secret imaginable, and how sometimes the greatest act of love comes from the most unexpected confession. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to protect what they love most, make sure you're subscribed, because this story will leave you speechless. Hit that notification bell, you won't want to miss what happens next. Because what Catalina had done would change everything. To understand how we got to that devastating hospital room, we need to go back to where it all began. Benjamin Crawford wasn't born into wealth, he built it with his bare hands. The son of a factory worker and school cafeteria manager from Cleveland, Benji earned his business degree through night school while pouring concrete during the day. By 35, he had transformed abandoned warehouses across Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania into luxury developments. Crawford Properties wasn't just a business, it was proof that the American dream still existed. His specialty was seeing potential where others saw decay. That old steel mill, now a tech campus. That crumbling downtown district, now home to young professionals and growing families. By 2018, his empire was worth over $50 million. But success means nothing when your mourning children you believe are dead. Everything changed in 2015 at a heated community planning meeting in Toledo. Residents were debating his latest project, a historic district redevelopment. That's where he first saw her. Catalina Rodriguez stood at the podium, challenging every developer in the room. As a social worker specializing in family services, she had one demand: affordable housing for the families who would be displaced. Her passion was magnetic, her conviction undeniable. They couldn't have been more different. Benji drove luxury cars and owned properties across 3 states. Catalina lived in a modest apartment and used public transportation. He saw urban renewal as progress. She saw it as potential displacement of vulnerable families. Yet somehow, opposites attracted. He was fascinated by her dedication to social justice. She was impressed that he actually listened to her concerns about affordable housing, rare among developers of his status. They married in 2016 in a ceremony that perfectly captured their 2 worlds, a simple church wedding, followed by a reception at one of his renovated warehouse venues. But the same differences that drew them together soon created distance. Benji's work demanded 18-hour days, constant travel, and high-stakes negotiations. Relaxation meant reviewing architectural plans or scouting new properties. Catalina, meanwhile, carried the emotional weight of her cases home every night. Crisis calls from families in her caseload interrupted dinners, vacations, and quiet moments together. While Benji built buildings, Catalina tried to rebuild broken families. Money became another source of tension. Benji believed his wealth should provide comfort and security. Catalina felt guilty spending money on luxuries when her clients struggled to afford basic necessities. She continued working despite his suggestions that she could quit. Their philosophical differences about wealth and responsibility created constant friction. Early 2018 brought news that should have been the answer to their problems. At what Catalina expected to be a routine 8-week appointment, Dr. Patricia Holloway ordered an unexpected ultrasound. The moment 3 distinct heartbeats filled the examination room was both miraculous and terrifying. Benji's reaction was instant excitement. Visions of 3 little ones running through their custom-built home, the legacy he would leave them, the family dynasty they could create. For Catalina, the news triggered every fear she'd carried from her own childhood. Raised by a single mother who had immigrated from Mexico, Catalina had grown up watching her mother struggle with just one child. The statistics from her social work training haunted her. Multiple births significantly increased risks of postpartum depression, financial strain, and marital breakdown. Have you ever received news that should have been the best day of your life, but instead filled you with dread? As the pregnancy progressed, Benji's behavior confirmed her worst fears. He started working longer hours, ostensibly to prepare financially for 3 children. When she needed him most, during all-day morning sickness, through complications requiring bed rest, he was reviewing contracts or meeting with investors. The breaking point came at 28 weeks when early labor symptoms required hospitalization. Benji was in Detroit closing a major deal and didn't return until the crisis had passed. Alone in that hospital room, connected to monitors tracking 3 heartbeats, Catalina made a decision that would destroy both their lives. But what Catalina did next would haunt both their lives forever. Before we reveal the shocking deception, hit that like button if you think family secrets always find their way to the surface. At 34 weeks, Catalina's worst fears became reality. True premature labor struck while Benji was 300 miles away in Pittsburgh, negotiating the purchase of a former steel mill. When the contractions began, Rosa Rodriguez, Catalina's mother, was her emergency contact. Luna, Sophia, and Amber Crawford were born weighing under 4 pounds each. Their tiny bodies required immediate intensive care, breathing tubes, feeding tubes, round-the-clock monitoring. The medical team's focus was entirely on keeping 3 fragile lives stable, not on complex family dynamics. While doctors fought to save her granddaughters, Rosa was making calls of her own. As a woman who had raised Catalina alone after being abandoned by her husband, Rosa viewed Benji's pattern of absence as proof of his unfitness as a father. In her mind, she wasn't committing a crime, she was protecting her family. Rosa's network included Dr. Margareta Kowalski, who operated a private birthing center in rural Michigan. The facility specialized in confidential adoptions and off-grid births for families needing privacy, celebrities avoiding publicity, families fleeing domestic violence, and occasionally, mothers protecting children from fathers they deemed dangerous. While Catalina remained in Toledo Hospital recovering from delivery complications, the triplets were secretly transferred to Dr. Kowalski's facility. Official hospital records showed NICU admissions, but specific details were mysteriously removed or redacted. When Benji finally arrived from Pittsburgh, Rosa met him in the hallway with devastating news. Her story was both plausible and heartbreaking. The babies had been born too early. Their lungs weren't developed enough to sustain life, and despite the medical team's best efforts, all 3 had died within hours. The news shattered him completely. In his grief and shock, he didn't question the lack of medical records or death certificates. He trusted Rosa's explanation that the hospital was handling all arrangements for the stillborn children. Meanwhile, Dr. Kowalski was arranging new identities for the triplets. They were documented as baby girl Rodriguez A, B, and C with no father listed. Birth certificates were issued through a Native American tribal authority that had agreements with the facility, documentation that appeared legitimate but wouldn't trigger systems that might alert Benji. For 5 years, Benji visited tiny graves in Riverside Cemetery every month. He brought flowers on their birthdays, Christmas, and whenever the grief became unbearable. He spoke to headstones bearing names he had chosen: Hope, Faith, and Grace Crawford. While Benji was mourning at empty graves, his daughters were taking their first steps 200 miles away. Catalina and Rosa had established themselves on a small organic farm in Traverse City, Michigan. The rural setting provided isolation and a community that respected privacy. Here Luna, Sophia, and Amber grew from fragile premature infants into healthy, bright children with distinct personalities. Luna emerged as the natural leader, tall for her age, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She organized elaborate games and adventures for her sisters, displaying leadership qualities that reminded Catalina painfully of Benji's business acumen. Sophia was the artist, constantly creating elaborate drawings and stories that she would act out with her sisters. Her creativity and dreamy nature echoed Benji's late father, who had been a weekend painter. Amber was the diplomat, the one who negotiated peace when her sisters argued. Her emotional intelligence and gentle demeanor allowed her to understand adult tensions that her sisters missed. Their education came through a network of homeschooling families and alternative educators. They learned to read early, spoke both English and Spanish fluently, and received instruction from various community members with different expertise. But their world remained carefully contained. The deception required constant vigilance. The triplets could never appear in public photographs, attend traditional schools, or participate in activities that might create official records. They grew up knowing their existence was a secret, that they must never talk to strangers about their family. Catalina told them their father was a dangerous man who would try to take them away if he ever found them. This narrative felt emotionally accurate to her. She genuinely believed Benji's wealth and legal resources would allow him to gain custody and separate her from her children. Can you imagine living every day knowing that your children's entire existence is built on a lie? While Benji attended grief counseling and struggled with depression, Catalina developed chronic anxiety and insomnia. She worked remotely for a non-profit supporting domestic violence survivors. Her world shrunk to revolve entirely around the triplets and maintaining their security. As the girls grew older, maintaining their secret existence became increasingly complex. They began asking why they couldn't have social media accounts, why they never appeared in family photos, why they couldn't participate in activities their friends enjoyed. For 5 years, this elaborate deception held. 2 families living parallel lives, one built on grief, the other on fear. But secrets this big have a way of demanding to be told. By 2023, Margaret Crawford was dying of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. But her mind remained razor-sharp and deeply troubled by a 5-year-old mystery. Margaret wasn't just any grandmother. She had worked as a school nurse for 30 years before becoming a teacher. Her medical background made her ask questions that others hadn't thought to ask. During their daily visits, Margaret began pressing Benji for details about the triplets' supposed death. Where were the medical records? The death certificates? The autopsy reports that hospitals routinely required for multiple infant deaths? When Benji realized he had no concrete evidence, no paperwork, no medical explanations, no communication with the doctors, who supposedly tried to save his daughters, Margaret's suspicions crystallized into conviction. Sometimes it takes someone with nothing left to lose to ask the right questions. Acting on his mother's insistence, Benji hired Thomas Brennan, a former police detective specializing in missing persons cases. Brennan had handled complex family situations before, but nothing quite like this. Brennan's methodical approach immediately revealed alarming inconsistencies. While documentation existed for Catalina's hospital admission and discharge, there were no corresponding birth or death certificates for triplets in any Ohio jurisdiction. The hospital's internal records showed evidence of NICU admissions, during the relevant time frame, but specific details had been mysteriously removed. Medical staff who had worked that shift were no longer employed at the facility. Brennan discovered that Rosa Rodriguez had multiple connections to social workers and medical professionals involved in controversial custody cases. Phone records revealed communications between Rosa and Dr. Kowalski's Michigan facility during the exact period surrounding the births. The breakthrough came when Brennan found that Catalina and Rosa had relocated to Michigan shortly after the divorce. Property records showed Rosa purchasing a house in Traverse City with cash. Utility records indicated 3 children living at the address. Most damning of all, school district inquiries revealed 3 girls of the appropriate ages being homeschooled under the names Luna, Sophia, and Amber Rodriguez. When Brennan presented his findings, Benji faced an agonizing reality. His daughters were alive. They had been hidden from him for 5 years. The revelation created a war between rage and hope. Rage at the elaborate deception that had cost him years of his daughters' lives. Hope that he might finally have the family he had grieved for so long. His lawyers advised caution. Confronting Catalina directly might cause her to disappear again with the children. Family courts would require substantial proof to overturn an existing arrangement, especially one maintained for years. But Margaret was running out of time. As her condition deteriorated in October 2023, she made one final, urgent request. "Bring me my granddaughters before I die," she whispered. "They deserve to know their grandmother, and I deserve to hold them before I go to heaven." Margaret's plea forced Benji's hand. The dying woman who had solved the mystery demanded to meet the children whose existence she had helped expose. What would you do if you discovered your children were alive after 5 years of grief? Let us know in the comments. November 3rd, 2023. The call came at 2 p.m. Margaret's condition had deteriorated rapidly. Benji needed to come immediately. When Benji pushed open the door to room 237, time stopped. There, beside his dying mother's bed, sat Catalina. But it wasn't his ex-wife's presence that made his world tilt off its axis. 3 little girls stood quietly near the window. 5 years old. Dark hair like their mother's, but unmistakable family features. Luna's intelligent eyes reminded him of his mother at that age. Sophia had the artistic fingers and dreamy expression of his late father. Amber possessed a gentle watchfulness that spoke of wisdom beyond her years. "Those are my daughters," he whispered, the words torn from his soul. Margaret's weak voice cut through the stunned silence. "Benji," she said, satisfaction evident despite her frail condition, "meet Luna, Sophia, and Amber. Your daughters." The children moved instinctively toward their mother when they saw the strange man enter. For their entire conscious lives they had been told their father was dangerous, a man who would try to take them away from the only parent they knew. Luna, true to her role as protector, stepped boldly in front of Sophia and Amber. At 5 years old, she had already learned to shield her sisters from perceived threats. Her first words to Benji were delivered with startling directness. "Are you going to take us away from Mama?" Benji knelt to their eye level, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Hello," he managed. "I'm your daddy. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Sophia, her curiosity stronger than her fear, studied Benji's features with an artist's attention to detail. She whispered to Amber, "He has Grandma Margaret's nose." The observation revealed that Margaret had shown them family photos during their visit, planting seeds of recognition. Catalina's reaction was a storm of conflicting emotions. She had clearly not expected Benji to arrive during their visit. Her body language suggested she was calculating whether to flee or stand her ground. "Hello, Benji," she said quietly, 5 years of accumulated guilt evident in her voice. "Your mother asked me to bring them." She figured out the truth. The presence of everyone she loved most in one room, combined with the weight of years of deception, finally shattered her defensive barriers. She began crying, first quietly, then with increasing intensity as the full impact overwhelmed her. "I thought I was protecting them," she said through her tears, looking directly at Benji for the first time in years. "You were never there. Always working, always traveling. I was afraid you would take them away from me, afraid they would just be another business project for you to manage." Benji's response was a mixture of anguish and fury that had been building for 5 years. "You let me believe they were dead," he said, his voice breaking. "I grieved for them every day. I go to their graves on what I thought were their birthdays. I've been visiting empty graves for 5 years." The children listened to this exchange with growing understanding that their world was more complicated than they had been told. The adults' pain was visible, and it didn't match the simple story of a dangerous father they had always heard. Amber, the most emotionally intuitive of the three, moved closer to Margaret's bedside and asked with heartbreaking innocence, "Grandma, why is everyone so sad?" Margaret used her final reserves of strength to address the crisis unfolding around her deathbed. Her voice was barely audible, but her message was crystal clear. "You both made mistakes," she told them, each word requiring tremendous effort. "Catalina, you were wrong to hide these beautiful children from their father. Benji, you were wrong to choose work over family when Catalina needed you most. But these girls need both of their parents now." Her attention shifted to the triplets, who had been absorbing the adult conversation with increasing comprehension. "Luna, Sophia, Amber," she said, "your daddy isn't perfect, but he's not dangerous. He's been looking for you because he loves you, not because he wants to hurt you. Your mama made a mistake, but she made it because she loves you too." Margaret's final act was to ask Benji and Catalina to join hands around her bed, while the children stood close by. The gesture created a moment of shared purpose that transcended their individual anger and grief. "Promise me," she whispered with her last strength, "that you'll figure out how to be a family. These girls deserve better than the pain you've been carrying." In that hospital room, a dying grandmother's love created the first moment of unity this fractured family had experienced in 5 years. Margaret had used her final breath to demand healing from the people she loved most. But the hardest part wasn't the revelation, it was what came next. The revelation created a legal nightmare that no court had seen before. How do you establish custody for children who officially didn't exist in one state, but had lived under alternative documentation in another for 5 years? Family court judge Maria Hernandez called it the most complex case of her career. Benji's lawyers advised he could pursue criminal charges against Catalina for parental kidnapping, but that path would likely result in the children being placed in foster care during legal proceedings. The thought of further traumatizing his daughters made criminal prosecution unthinkable for Benji. Instead, his legal team focused on establishing parental rights while minimizing disruption to the children's lives. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a child psychologist specializing in family reunification, was appointed to evaluate the situation. Her initial assessment revealed healthy, intelligent children who had strong attachments to their mother, but deep-seated fears about their father that would require professional intervention. The weeks following the hospital confrontation were particularly difficult for Luna, Sophia, and Amber. They struggled to reconcile years of stories about their dangerous father with the reality of a man who seemed genuinely sad and eager to know them. Initial visits were supervised and limited to public places where the children felt safe. Benji had to learn to interact with 5-year-olds who viewed him as a stranger, suppressing his natural desire to make up for lost time in favor of building trust gradually. The first breakthrough came when Sophia asked Benji about the buildings he designed. Her artistic nature was intrigued by architecture, and she spent an entire afternoon asking him to draw floor plans and explain how structures were built. This shared interest provided safe conversation and allowed Sophia to see her father as a person beyond their complicated family situation. Luna's resistance began to soften when Benji demonstrated he wasn't trying to replace her role as her sister's protector. He consistently deferred to her knowledge about her sister's preferences and routines, acknowledging her importance rather than challenging her authority. This approach helped Luna see him as a potential ally instead of a threat. Amber's breakthrough was the most emotional. During a visit to a children's museum, she fell and scraped her knee badly enough to require first aid. Benji's gentle care and obvious concern for her well-being helped her understand that he wanted to protect rather than harm her. For the first time, she allowed him to comfort her without looking to Catalina for permission, a moment that brought tears to both parents' eyes. Meanwhile, Catalina was processing her own psychological challenges. Therapy sessions revealed how her childhood abandonment had influenced her fear-based decision-making. She had to confront the reality that her attempt to protect her children had caused the very harm she sought to prevent. Learning to co-parent required extensive professional support. Benji and Catalina had to develop communication skills for discussing their children's needs while managing their complicated feelings about the past. Holiday and vacation planning required delicate negotiation. The children had established traditions with Catalina and Rosa that were meaningful to them, but Benji also wanted to create new family memories. The solution involved blending existing customs with new ones. Through this painful process, profound life lessons emerged. Fear-based decisions create more problems than they solve. Catalina's attempt to protect her children had robbed them of their father and him of precious years. Wealth can't buy back lost time. Despite his millions, Benji couldn't purchase the first steps, first words, or first days of school he had missed. Perhaps most remarkably, the children demonstrated incredible resilience when the adults prioritized their needs over personal conflicts. Luna, Sophia, and Amber adapted to their expanding family when they felt secure and supported. The hardest truth Catalina had to face: sometimes the person we're protecting our children from is ourselves. Her own trauma had created a cycle that nearly destroyed the family she was trying to preserve. As 2024 progressed, the Crawford Rodriguez family began developing new patterns that acknowledged their complex history while building toward a healthier future. Progress was measured in small victories, shared meals, bedtime stories, and moments of genuine laughter. The process required all four family members to release old assumptions and embrace a more complex understanding of their relationships. They were learning that families can be rebuilt from even the most devastating foundations, but only when everyone commits to the hard work of healing. Today, in 2025, the Crawford Rodriguez family continues their journey of healing. But their extraordinary story has taught us life lessons that extend far beyond their own experience. First, trust is fragile. Years of deception can't be undone overnight. Luna, Sophia, and Amber are still learning to trust their father, while Benji is learning that trust must be earned through consistent actions, not grand gestures. Second, fear makes poor decisions. Catalina's childhood abandonment by her own father influenced her choice to hide the children. When we make decisions based on our wounds rather than wisdom, we often create the very problems we're trying to avoid. Third, presence matters more than presence. Benji learned that work success means nothing without family. All his millions couldn't buy back the first steps, first words, or bedtime stories he missed. Time is the only currency that truly matters in relationships. Fourth, children adapt when adults heal. The triplets thrived once their parents focused on their needs instead of their own pain. Kids are incredibly resilient when the adults in their lives do the hard work of healing. Fifth, some wounds become wisdom. This family's deepest pain became their path to deeper connection. They learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means transforming suffering into strength. The universal truths this story reveals are profound. Every family secret carries a cost. The lies we tell to protect often cause the most harm. Healing is possible, but it requires everyone to do the work. Margaret's legacy lives on in her granddaughter's laughter and her son's newfound commitment to family. Her final act of love, demanding the truth, saved her entire family from a lifetime of deception. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to learn what actually matters. The Crawford Rodriguez family discovered that love isn't perfect, families aren't fairy tales, but healing is always possible when people choose courage over comfort. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that families can heal from even the deepest wounds. And subscribe for more extraordinary stories that prove love always finds a way. Because everyone deserves to believe that broken families can become beautiful families. They just might look different than we expected. Some endings are actually beginnings.